special forum that we're having. Deb and Keith Kraft are here from Redfield, where Keith is a pastor at the UCC Church, and they do a program where they offer some education and awareness and some ways to prevent suicide, and so we want to be sure to welcome them here today. So we are glad that they're here to share with us on this significant and also a sensitive subject. But thank you so much for coming, and for Wendy Figland and Peggy and others on the committee for working to put this together. So thank you so much. And with that, we'll go ahead and begin. Deb, here's your mic.
All right. Thank you.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't know what else to say. Just to introduce myself again, I'm Keith Kraft. We actually grew up around Wessington Springs. I farmed and ranched in Wessington Springs until 1997. And then we moved to St. Louis for me to go to seminary. People ask, why did you quit farming and ranching and go to seminary? I say, God called and the banker pushed. And there's a lot of truth to that. So I went to seminary. We moved the family. Our oldest was an 8th grader, and Belisa was an 8th grader. Andrew was in 6th grade, and Ben was in 1st grade when we moved to St. Louis. Then when I graduated from seminary, moved to Mobridge, was there for 22 years. And then in 2022, we moved to Redfield. So I'll let Deb talk a little bit about what she does.
Well, I'm a retired school teacher, so that's one of the advantages when you can retire a little bit earlier, is you can accept calls in different places, perhaps. So I taught for 28 years, and most of that time was family and consumer science, or the old home economics that many of us grew up with. The last 8 years, I taught predominantly culinary classes. So I was working with preparing students to work in commercial food service establishments. So it was some of the basics from what I had before, but also some new things. So I worked with a wide range of students in ability and age, anywhere from 7th grade to graduating from high school.
So, as you all know, suicide is a very sensitive subject, and it's not an easy topic to talk about. So, why do we do this? Why put ourselves through this? Our son died by suicide December 8th, 2014. We got the phone call about 5:30 in the morning. I got a phone call from the National Guard sergeant. Ben was in the Guards. Of course, when you get a phone call at 5 o'clock and 5:30 in the morning, it's not going to be good, especially when you look out the window and you see a police officer with the sergeant. And that was a Monday morning, and we had the funeral on Saturday. And in between that time, some things happened. One of the things that was going around was rumors. Oh, Ben broke up with his girlfriend that he was living with. That's why he died by suicide. He had a bad experience in Afghanistan because he was with the Guards. He was a year over in Afghanistan. He was mostly bored in Afghanistan, so that wasn't it. And then I had an aunt who basically sent a sympathy card that basically said, in spite of Ben's actions, I will struggle to be proud of him. And at that point, I thought, I am not going to be ashamed of my son, and I'm not going to be ashamed of the way he died. And during that time, I flashed back to when Ben was in high school. I was sitting in my office. I got a phone call from the principal, and he was probably about 16 at that time. And he said, Keith, you need to come to my office. Ben is sitting in my office, and he's talking about experiencing dark places. And that was the first time we had any hint that Ben was struggling with mental illness of any kind. We got him some counseling. He worked through it. The counselor said he's doing great. He knows how to kind of, what he needs to do when these things are coming on. After he was graduated from high school, he went to into the National Guards. He was in Fort Leonard Wood, basic training. You would think if you were going to break, that would be the time to do it. But he always seemed to know where to go to, who the churches were, who the pastors were, who the counselors were when he was in that time. And so we do this because for a couple of reasons. One, we don't want any other families to go through what we went through. And two, we want to, hopefully raise the awareness so it kind of breaks some of that stigma that's been around for so long. It's getting better. It's not as bad as it was back in the 70s, 80s, but it still has a long way to go. Mental illness and suicide has a huge stigma that goes with it. And the third reason is because as parents who have lost a child, we want other families to know that have lost family members to suicide that they're not alone, that there is support out there. And so that's why we do this. So what we're going to do today is kind of tell a little bit of our story. We're going to introduce you to Ben, and then give you some statistics, but then hopefully give you some things that might be helpful for you if you find yourself in a situation of maybe experiencing the dark places, or if you know of somebody who might come to you and mention that. So,
and some of the things are things that we've learned too about how do you provide support for families? How do you provide support for people who have had a tragic event like this occur within their families? And, how do you go on? So those are some of the things there. You have a...
You're the first.
Yep, but I need the new slide. Do you have the clicker?
Nope.
Okay, so, there we go. There we are. Okay. So Ben was a pretty normal kid. He grew up in most of his life was in Mobridge. He was in athletics. He was in band. He was in choir. So he was busy. He was also very involved in music. He loved band and choir, especially vocal music. Theater, that was another thing, oral interp, anything that allowed him to get up to express himself. And he usually wasn't afraid to express himself. So schoolwork, well, that wasn't quite so important, We did what Mom and Dad required us to do, so he knew he had to have certain grades, but it was kind of like, as long as I get those grades, I'm fine. So not a big push. But he was a very social person. He was a person who would talk to anyone. And usually we used to give him a hard time about girlfriends or people he knew, because it was like instead of the sailor with a girl in every port, he knew someone wherever he went, it seemed like. So he was very independent and very opinionated, but he wasn't perfect. He was just an average kid in the school system. So, but he did kind of grow up in a fishbowl. When your dad's a pastor and your mom is a teacher, you can't go very far in a community without everybody knowing what's happening.
As I had mentioned, as a junior, he enlisted in the South Dakota National Guard. He was with the 200th Engineering out of Mobridge. But it was actually Mobridge Pier and Chamberlain were kind of connected together, but he was out of Mobridge. He graduated from high school, went to college, and he started out in Northern because he was going to go into music theater. Now, as a parent, you're going, okay, music theater, what are you going to do with music theater? But you just let him decide. And then after he'd been to Afghanistan, he seemed to be a little more focused on what he wanted to do. He started going, transferred then to Augustana, and he was actually seriously considering about going into seminary and becoming a pastor. And he would have made one heck of a good pastor because he understood people.
Yes, music and theater would have been a good fit.
But even more than that, I think some of it is with that mental illness that he struggled with, that darkness. He understood people who were struggling. He was always very compassionate about people. Many of his closest friends in Mobridge were Native American. And he just kind of were drawn to them. And so Ben didn't really fit the mold. So you can imagine this. This is a guy who's in the National Guard, and you kind of know what Guard mentality is like. And he's also in theater. So they don't really mesh. One of the times he went from doing practice to doing guard drill, and he still had makeup on.
Yeah, they asked him, do you have mascara on? And he's like, oh, I must not have gotten it all off from before. So those were the things. So Ben had a semester left of college. He was within a semester of graduation at the time that his death occurred.
But he kept it hidden, this whatever, the darkness, whatever it was. I mean, it was a shock. It was a shock to his friends. It was a shock to his professors. It was a shock to his parents. He didn't fit. This gentleman, this young man who loved life, loved people, and then to take his life, the two images just do not fit together. And that's part of the reason, again, why we do this.
So we'll talk about some of the numbers, and I know that there's some information in the back. We have used information from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We've also used things from the South Dakota Department of Health. So we try to use as up-to-date as we can, but realize that with the accounting type things, statistics lag. So when we look at these things, in the United States, suicide is the 11th leading cause of death. And we are looking at 132 people per day when we look at suicide. In 2021, that was 48,000 people who died by suicide. And when we look at the attempts are even larger than that. We're looking at 1,700,000 attempts in a 1-year period. So it's not just a minor problem that we can kind of sweep under the rug and say, oh, this doesn't really happen. What we find is that it's not isolated by socioeconomic status or by where you live. It's all over. The highest rate of suicide is among white males. Almost 70% of those deaths are white males.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think white males' death rates are higher?
Yes.
They're more successful and they use a more lethal
Lethal.
means.
Yep.
There's probably That might be a little higher on attempts, but that would be why there are more successful, as you can call it that.
Yeah. And when we look at that, again, when we think about ages, we need to realize that yes, this is a young, often very young people, what I consider today very young, but it's also an issue with males over the age of 75. So
Why do you suppose that is? Men over age of 75. Yep. Going through life changes. We can't do what we used to do. It puts us in a place that we just think that the family would be better off without us.
yeah. And that's what you hear and that's what you see very often is that idea of burden, pain, people would be better off without me here. So, but the difficult thing and part of the issue that we raise is also that mental health issue, because we know that 9 out of 10 who die by suicide have a mental health issue that also contributes to their death. Sometimes it's diagnosed, sometimes it isn't. So it makes it difficult to do that. But it does say to us that suicide is a health issue. So in the same sense that we try to prevent cancer, we try to prevent heart attacks, we also need to look at trying to have good mental health, good support systems so that we can prevent suicide.
You're on the next one, too.
All right, so we'll go one more to the next slide. So in 2022, these are the South Dakota statistics. So on average, one person dies by suicide every 54 hours.
In South Dakota.
That's in South Dakota, yes. It is the leading cause of death for people between the ages of 10 to 29. And that 10 to 14 year age is changing a lot. So that didn't used to be so much, but just as we started to see more different things happening with younger children, we're seeing suicide rates in that 10 to 14 age. There are 192 deaths statewide, and realize that all these numbers are probably somewhat underreported, because oftentimes families do not want to say they died by suicide or they died by an overdose. It will simply be they died at home, those kinds of things. And medical personnel don't want to embarrass families. They don't want to say they died by suicide, and so it's often not reported that way. Because again, we still have that social feeling of this is an act that we don't want to talk about. We don't want to have to confront.
The other thing is how many accidents that happen on the road
Yes, single
are
car
really
accidents.
accidents that are possibly suicide. We had a young lady that was in Mobridge. She moved, and her dad was a trucker, and he was letting her drive the truck. And she talked about she was driving, and a guy came and just swerved right in front of the truck because he knew it wouldn't hurt the truck.
And once you kind of have that awareness, there are some of the things that, as you even look at police reports, we talk about death by police, in the sense that people put themselves in positions so that police officers don't have any option other than to shoot. And so rather than it being a suicide, we force someone else to do that. And so it's difficult. These are
So the
difficult
numbers
things.
are actually probably higher. Probably not. Probably they
Yeah.
are. Okay.
But we do rank 6th in the nation for suicides per 100,000 people. This really isn't a number that we want to be in the top 10 for. Anything that we can do to help reduce this to keep our people alive is an important step.
Okay, so we don't want to just give you statistics. We want to hopefully give you at least a taste of something that you can take home with you that might help you. If, like I said, if you know of somebody who is, so you raise your awareness of what might be going on in somebody else's life. So there are some signs. Ben was very good at hiding it. Some of the things you might look at back where 2020 hindsight and say, oh, that may have been a sign. But here are some of the warning signs. So if they talk about killing themselves, they talk about, well, I can't go on. Or, I'm going through a bad time, but, pretty quick it'll be all over. So be aware of some of the things that people, are saying, some of the warning signs. A sense of feeling hopeless. Having no reason to live. I can't do anything right. I'm a burden to people. I'm a burden to my family. My family would be better off without me. Feeling trapped. There's a sense of unbearable pain. So since we've done this, and we started a support group in Mobridge, and we're very open about it. Everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people in Mobridge knew that we were open to talking. I was in my office one late afternoon, and I was sitting there, and a young man, former Marine, he was Ben's assistant wrestling coach. He comes into my office, and he's like, I need to talk. And I knew you would listen. And I'm not kidding you. I had never seen this before. Usually we think of the mental pain. This young man was sitting there like this, just rocking back and forth because of the physical pain that was causing him because of the mental pain. And that was really the first time I had ever been aware of how much that pain goes, not just in the mind, but goes physically. And just it becomes unbearable. And then there are some that do not, like Ben, that do not show the signs. The only person that knew that our son was suicidal to that point was his girlfriend that he was living with. He had threatened suicide 2 other times, but they never told anybody. So we'll get into that a little bit later.
The good news is the gentleman that Keith worked with or visited with that day, they were able to call his doctors. They were able to get him some changes in medication. He continued his therapy. They moved and did some job changes. And the last time that we talked to him, he was doing very well. He was very much improved. And I think, that's one of the things sometimes that we don't talk about either, is that with the right medication, with the right therapy, with a combination of things that changes in our lives, that people with mental illnesses can go on to live healthy, productive lives. And I wouldn't have ever thought about that. I wouldn't have thought that that was so true. But when we look at things then as far as behaviors, we see some behaviors that perhaps are cues. And as a teacher, probably the cues would tell me as much or more about a child's state of mind as anything else. So it might be an increased use of drug or alcohol. It could be looking for a way to end their lives, such as searching online for a method. In school districts, yes, there are blocks that are put up to help prevent some of this kind of searching, but a child who really wants to find these things can find these things. They may withdraw from activities, isolate themselves from family and friends, sleeping too much or sleeping too little. So that always being awake, always being kind of almost hyper type thing, visiting or calling people to say goodbye, giving away things that are prized possessions. So if we see that happening, we see people giving away those things that have always been very important to them, it's a sign that it's like, I'm not going to need these things. I want them to go to someone that I know will like them and use them. It can be aggressive behavior, and it can also be taking unnecessary risks. Within Ben's guard unit, within 5 years, there were 3 deaths by suicide. When we talked to his sergeant, he made the comment that Ben was not the person he would have figured. There was one of the other young men, he said he would volunteer for anything. The most dangerous, the most outlandish thing, if you could give him a challenge, he didn't think about his personal safety because he didn't really care. And so we see some very differences in behavior and ways that people handle things.
So, and then moods, different moods, depression, sense of anxiety, loss of interest. So we just don't really care. We used to hang out with our friends. Now we don't care. We're irritable. There's also a sense, especially with mental illness, a sense of shame that comes with it. Because, after all, we're supposed to be mentally strong. Believe and you can achieve. You can do whatever you think you can. You can, a lot of times it's like, oh, I'm feeling depressed. Well, just, think happy thoughts. Akuma matata. Everything will be better. And for people who are dealing with depression, that doesn't work. And so it's hard for them to talk about it then. Agitation, anger. The one that we really go, that is really easy to miss, relief, sudden improvement. There was a young gal in Mobridge who was always kind of depressed, dumpy, kind of a loner, didn't really talk much. And all of a sudden one day, she was happy. Just changed totally in her personality. She was happy. She was outgoing. That day she died by suicide. Why? Because she had made a decision. She had made a decision to take her life, and she felt relief. Finally, the pain is going to go away. I've made that decision. And so a lot of times, I even talked to the principal that day or afterwards, and he said, I saw her that day, and she was just so happy, and I thought, oh, good, she's finally coming around. So, and these are, a lot of the difficult thing about every one of these is they're common. How many of us don't get dumpy or depressed? And sometimes long term. How many of us don't say certain things? With Ben, 2020 hindsight, he called Deb on Sunday night. And he said, well, I just want to let you know that my girlfriend and I, because they'd been living together for, I don't know, about a year, that we've separated. He says, I need to get some things straightened out in my head. And Deb says, well, Keith, maybe you should call Ben. And I'm sitting here thinking as a father, if I have a girlfriend and I've just broken up with her, I don't want to talk to my dad about things like that. So I texted him. I said, just checking, how are you doing? Oh, fine, he said. I'm just watching old films of plays that he had been in, the things that he'd worked on in school. That was Sunday night. By midnight, his girlfriend had called because they had been talking back and forth. His girlfriend had called and had a police check, make a wellness check at midnight. And they said he was fine. He came to the door, he's fine. 2 o'clock, he was gone. So
we know that people can put on that face. We know that they can show us what they want to show us, and that does make it hard. So when we look at these things, then it is difficult to know exactly what's happening. But we do know, too, that there are certain things in life that stress us, things that make it difficult for us to cope. And so as we look at some of those situations, we can see that divorce, that breakup of relationships, legal problems, prolonged unemployment, that financial problems, a change or a loss of reputation. There's such a stigma, again, to saying that I can't physically go to work or I can't physically do something because I don't feel well. When people look at you and say, well, you look well. You know, I know of people today who will say, I need a mental wellness day. But when I first started teaching, oh no, there is no way I would have ever gone to my principal and said, I really can't come in today, I need a mental wellness day. I would have been expected just to show up and to do my job and to keep on going. The death of a close friend or a family member, it might be arrest, it might be a diagnosis of a long-term illness or a debilitating illness. You know, I think of way back when we lived in Wessington Springs, and of a gentleman who had found out that he had cancer. His wife had died from cancer. He knew what that was going to look like, and so his choice then was that he would rather die by his own hand than to deal with the suicide or deal with the illness. And obviously there had to be other things that were going on too. But you know, in hindsight, again, you look at things and you go, why and how come? And the mind is a strange thing. We don't know always why. And often it's not one thing. It's a combination of things. So it's many of these items that are on here.
So, and we're looking at these stressors. These are things that many, many people go through. These are, and they don't die by suicide. These are common things again. So if we go to the next one. So mental illness, according to the National Health Institute, mental illness affects nearly 1 in 5 adults. Among young adults 18 to 25, 30% have experienced mental illness, almost 10% very severe mental illness. Among adolescents 13 to 18, as many as 49% experience any sort of mental illness, 22% experience severe mental health challenges. Both mental illness and suicide come with a stigma, and this is my thinking. My thinking is mental illness plus a stressor can lead to suicide. Stressors might be common, everyday things. Like our son was one semester from graduating from college. He had to make a decision. Was he going to go into seminary? What does he do with his girlfriend? How does that fit into it? Is this relationship working? So common stressors, everybody goes through those questions. But you put that along with a mental illness, with a depression and anxiety, the two combinations then can lead to suicide. Not all the time. Suicide, there are other factors that could be. But with our son, I would guess this is pretty much what it was. And a lot of other people that I've lost, that have lost loved ones to suicide have said the same thing. So mental illness plus a stressor. That's why we brought up the other ones with the divorce. So if somebody's going through you know they're already depressed, already dealing with anxiety, and now all of a sudden they're going through a divorce. Well, a lot of people go through a divorce, but if you put that with the stress or with the mental illness, it could be lethal. So you need to kind of be aware of that and check up on them.
And when we look at things, it doesn't, as we look at things historically and people that we know that people who have major heart attacks that are going to require changes in health, changes in what they're doing, stressor, often are depressed afterwards. Again, those health issues impact our mental health. Again, we don't all react by considering suicide, but it does say to us it's a time period when people we care about need extra support.
I'll do this one. So, next slide. So, if you are one of the people that is dealing with a mental illness, it is nothing to be ashamed of. Mental illness, like a physical illness, is not a sign of weakness. So many times we think of mental illness, well, they're mentally weak. Just like I said earlier, just get over it. Think positive thoughts. People dealing with mental illness, it is an illness. We don't think any less of people who are are dealing with cancer, and we don't say, well, you're physically weak because you have cancer. So we need to get rid of that stigma that goes with mental illness and suicide. Secondly, if you are an adolescent, a youth, tell a trusted adult. Talk to somebody about it. Seek help. If you are having suicidal thoughts, seek help. Again, talk with a trusted adult. We got this slide. Deb and I have talked to high school kids before, and we throw this in there because need to talk, and even adults. I mean, especially, us men. We can handle it on our own. Talk to somebody. Talk to somebody. Let them know that what you're dealing with. People care. A lot of people care about you.
And that's the whole thing. Each person is valuable, and each person is of value. So being able to go to someone, for adults, can you find or do you know someone you would trust to say, I'm struggling? Use that buddy system to find the right person who's going to help and support you, who's going to say, have you made an appointment? Did you show up for your appointment? How can I help you? Or sometimes it's a matter of what are those resources? You don't know where to go or who to see. Maybe that person can help you. And those are the things that are important. So if we talk about asking a friend or as a friend, you can talk to people in private, let them know that you care about them, that they mean something to you. The hardest thing for us to do is to ask directly, are you considering suicide? Are you thinking about taking your own life? Do you have a plan? And that is one of the really difficult things to do. But we know today that simply asking someone that question does not suggest them that action. When I first started teaching, it was, well, oh no, you would never ask that because then that would plant the idea. That's not true. That is not what happens. Being point blank and asking them that is such a difficult question to ask, but it's so important.
It's actually freeing for that person because that person has been holding it in for so long, and finally somebody finally cared enough to say, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing? In other words, I care. I want to know. And so it's freeing for that person to say, oh, I could finally say yes. I'm thinking about it. Or maybe they're not, but at least you know.
So if they say yes, there are certain things that you need to do. So it's helping them find treatment. It's not leaving them alone. It's making other people that are close to them aware of the situation. And so it isn't a time to say, oh, this is just a passing thing and you'll get over it. So we're not going to debate the value of life. We're not going to talk about minimizing their problems, and we're not going to solve their problems for them. We're simply going to say, okay, what can we do? And there are some things you can do with listening.
So, in your playbook for people that you think might be considering suicide, number one, ask. Ask directly. Don't beat around the bush. Don't ask, are you thinking about harming yourself? I mean, ask them if they are considering suicide. So ask directly. And if you don't get it out the first time, you can come around to it again. But ask. Second thing is listen. Listen, 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 listen. Do not try to fix their problems. Do not say everything's going to be all right. The main thing they need is just to have someone listen to them and get it out. Because you cannot fix their problems. We do not know what they are dealing with. And so the main thing is just listen. The other thing is take them seriously. When they're talking about it, don't brush it off. Don't say, oh, that's a stupid thing to do. Take them seriously. The other thing is let them know that what they're thinking is serious. You're considering suicide. This is serious. We need to take this serious, and we need to figure something out. So let them know that you think that you know this is serious. So listen. Ask, listen. Stay with them. If they are looking at a lethal means, stay with them until they can get more help. If they're looking at lethal means, help remove those. If they're looking at medication, pills, remove them. If they're looking at firearms, do not go into their house. Let somebody else who is more trained to do that. That's not a place you should be going.
And recognize that in some communities, like I know in the Sioux Falls community, they've worked with a program that individuals can take their weapons to the police, or they can take them to, this one was, the Legion was setting up a program where you could take your guns, your weapons to them, and they would hold them for you until such time that you wanted them returned. So family members, things like the keys for a gun safe, pull those keys. Do some of those things that you can. Medications, there are time locks for pill bottles. Think about some things like that. Or removing them if they're younger, remove those. They have to come to you for their medication. So do some of those things that you can to help remove those lethal methods.
One of the things to remember while you're listening, people who die by suicide don't want to die. They really do not. That might sound silly, but they really do not want to die. What they want is the pain to end. And this is the only option they see to end the pain. So as you are listening, remember that these people don't want to die. They want to live, and they're looking for a reason to live. And knowing that you are there gives them one reason to live. Knowing that somebody cares. So we've got ask, we've got listen. The last thing then is lead. Help them find the help they need. Whether it's a doctor, if it's for youth, talk to them. Who can we talk to? Especially with the youth, what we tell the youth is, you cannot keep this to yourself. A lot of times kids will come up to you and say, hey, I've got a secret. I want to tell you something, but promise me you won't tell anybody else. Don't keep that promise. You have got to tell an adult. But work with that child, work with your friend, whoever it is, on who that might be. It might be a teacher. It might not. It might be a counselor. It might not. You need to work with the people that are considering suicide and work with them who they are comfortable to go see. It might be a pastor. It might be a counselor. It might be a doctor. But stay with them. Help them find the resources they need.
And
go with them. Walk with them. And the one thing, we don't have it up there right now, 988.
Yep.
Remember that number, 988. It's a suicide hotline, and it will get you to whoever you need. And they will put you in contact if there's somebody else. But if you have no other resources, no other options, and the person isn't comfortable talking to somebody, in your area, 988 is a good place to start.
And 988 is a national number. It'll come into Sioux Falls to start with, to the helpline there. But the helpline is set up so that it can transfer people, and they try to transfer people to others in a similar situation. So similar age, male to male, female to female. They try to do those kinds of things. So it's a really good resource. And the other thing with 988 is realize you don't have to be suicidal to use 988. 988 can be used for any type of mental distress or questions. So just calling 988 doesn't necessarily indicate that you're suicidal. It's a terrific resource for other things. And also,
it's a good resource for family members.
yes.
I've lost somebody by suicide. I don't know how to deal with it. Call 988.
And then also, not everyone likes to talk over a phone. So they also have it set up with the text number of 741-741. So these are things that, yes, it might not be your choice of how to do these things, but knowing that there are these resources here can help. And realize, too, that within your area, there are local people who are trained to help you.
So, quick question. Who would you, if somebody came to you considering suicide, what are your options in Mitchell? Well, I know Redfield is. What's that? Yeah.
And when we talked to the dispatchers in Redfield about this, they were so disappointed because they said people in Redfield are taken to Aberdeen, but it is 24 hours only, and 24 hours is often not enough to do what needs to be done. So it is that issue of how do we handle things. And, in our area, it's Northeast Mental Health. Lutheran Social Services sometimes has counselors, but yeah, when you're in that crisis mode, it seems to be very limited as far as what we have for resources.
But one thing to remember on this is, if somebody comes to you and confides in you that they're considering suicide, don't go it alone. for you. Do not go it alone. Help them find the help. Maybe they need to talk to their local physician, their doctor. Maybe they have another friend that can also help, somebody that they trust.
So
don't go alone.
Yeah, realize that what we're starting is first aid.
Yeah, we're
No,
doing CPR.
We're just the beginning.
Yeah.
So if you can get people to some other place, because we're not trained, most of us, to be able to deal a lot with these issues. But if we can point people, if we can keep them safe until they can get that help, that's sometimes the best that we can do. Realize we have people who are mandated reporters. As a teacher, if a student said to me, I'm thinking of suicide, or I'm thinking about this, I have to report that. I have to go to my principal, I have to talk to them, they then have to run it up the chain of command, and they have to contact someone. So there are people that, so obviously, anytime a student would talk to me, if they were talking about that, I would have to say to them, I'm a mandated reporter. I cannot keep this a secret because I'm required by law to report this. Sometimes I think that students choose to tell a teacher because they know that we're mandated to do that. So there are people who are mandated reporters, medical personnel is another one.
Again, like I said, work with whoever is considering suicide. If it's a child, a youth, maybe telling their parents isn't the best people. Maybe a parent might just go ballistic. Maybe a grandparent might be a better option. The parent obviously at some point needs to know, but maybe it needs to come through a counselor or whatever. But work with them. Who are they comfortable going to? Who are you comfortable talking to? Don't keep it in. Yep, why?
Okay, and so when we look at why, we look at this and say each person is important, each person matters. And one of the things that I think every parent who's lost a child grieves about is all of the opportunities that we know our loved ones had to impact the world and to impact others, knowing that there's that loss, that we won't have those opportunities.
That's Ben.
Yeah.
That's typical Ben.
Yeah.
Bring them in.
So, and know that people care about you. Sometimes in our anxiety, in our illness, in our state of mind, we lose sight that there are really people who care about us. I think sometimes, and I sometimes feel guilty because I think in some ways I think more often on a daily basis about Ben than I think about Andrew or I think about Valisa, but it'll be just those little things that bring up his death or things that I'm reminded. One of the best things for a parent was when people would come up to me and they weren't afraid to say Ben's name, and they weren't afraid to say, this is what I remember about him. This is what made him really special. The people who walked across the street so they didn't have to talk to me, that hurt. But the people who shared with me what they remembered, those are the people that I think I can count on you, and I appreciate you.
The other thing is on that note, if you know of somebody who's lost a loved one to suicide, the best thing, again, try things like, and I've heard them, we heard them, God needed an angel. No, God didn't need an angel. I needed Ben, not God. The best thing that we had was after all these people came in and some were trying to give us talks, whatever, encourage us, the best thing I had was I had a gentleman that came up to me and said, I have no words. And I wanted to say, thank you. Finally somebody gets it. Because it's something, suicide is something you can't understand. And you aren't going to fix it. So just kind of remember that. If you know of somebody who's lost somebody to suicide, a loved one to suicide, don't be afraid to go talk to them. Just say, hey, we're here. You know, we can't know what you are going through, but we're here, and we care about you.
So why can you help? You can help because you provide love and concern. And what better place than people who care about you, people within your church, people within your friend group. Those are the people who care about you. They're the people who know you. You have some knowledge, and you can provide that network of support. So you can also be a source of hope. And I'll let you talk a little bit about source of hope. Okay.
Especially as a church. When you think about a church, where better than to give people hope than the church? That's what we're about, is giving people hope. And so, yeah, just kind of remember that. Are we going to do this, or do we? I know. Yeah, we'll do this.
Okay. So as we made arrangements.
Another slide?
Yep. As we made arrangements for Ben's funeral, there were questions of what you want to do and how you want to do things. And we really couldn't figure out, this is a young person. The poem inside of the funeral folder really didn't seem like they were a terrific fit.
For someone who died by suicide?
Yeah, for someone who has died by suicide. And so what we did is we went back to an exercise that I'd seen a teacher use. And so we wrote a poem about Ben. And the poem is, I am Ben. I am Ben. I am of Keith and Deb, Lee and Darlene, Don and Thelma. I am a brother of Lisa and Alex, Andrew and Jessica. I am an uncle of Julianne. I am the best friend of Haley.
I am the foothills of Wessington Springs, the river breaks of the Missouri. I'm a child of Eden Seminary and Mobridge Schools. I'm a young man of Northern State University and Augustana University. I am the farm. I am the city. I am the small town.
I am a warrior of the South Dakota National Guard. I am the 200th, a proud builder of bridges. I am a veteran of Afghanistan. I am theater, Northern Fort Players, and Black Hills Playhouse.
I am music, drama, and speech. I am an advocate for the voiceless. I am a hunter, a lover of the outdoors.
I am joy and happiness. I am pain and despair. I am the person you see. I am the person I keep hidden inside. I am confident. I am uncertain. I am hope for the future. I am despair for today.
I am a child of the church. I am a person of faith. I am loved by God and by many. I am Ben. One of the things that we did after Ben's death, one of the things that I did after Ben's death, which I swore I would, when I was younger, that I would never do, is I got a tattoo. And it started with our Ben's older brother, Andrew. He showed a tattoo that had a semicolon on it. Have you ever heard, the semicolon? It means you have been touched by suicide or mental illness in some way. And so I got a semicolon, and I put a Bible verse on mine, Genesis 1:1-2. It is a reminder to me that in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a deep darkness, and chaos covered the face of the earth, and God's Spirit swept over the deep. God's Spirit swept over the darkness and the chaos. And it is a reminder to me, this is my hope, this is my promise. It is a reminder to me that God was present in Ben's darkest, most chaotic moment of his life. So many times we think somebody who dies by suicide is like, well, they were deserted by God. No. I honestly believe that God was more present with Ben in that moment than he had any other time. And that's the hope and the promise that I hold on to.
So when Ben died, I was teaching, and my students knew I was out of school for a while and what had happened. You know, it's, again, a small community. But as time distanced itself, I realized that more of the students that I had did not know my story. And so I decided, after Keith had already gotten his tattoo, that yes, I would get a tattoo also. So my tattoo is a heart with a semicolon in it. And I had this done over Thanksgiving break. Well, I'm wearing long sleeves most of the time. I can still remember the day that I was in school and I had sleeves that were long but were loose. And I reached up onto the bulletin board to write something on the board, and my sleeve slipped down and my students saw my tattoo. And it was like, oh, and it was like,
Mrs. Kraft got a
Mrs.
tattoo.
Kraft has a tattoo. This is not what they expected their teacher to have. And so it became a way then for me to say to students, I'm willing to talk to you without me having to tell them my story. And it is really a way that, even though it's maybe not what most people would have thought of doing, but it has sparked conversation and given me an opportunity to talk to people, because oftentimes people that you maybe are waiting in line with will see a tattoo and say, tell me about your tattoo. What does it mean? And it is that idea that it's a way that we both carry part of Ben with us every day. It's that reminder that he's still in our hearts.
Just a couple other things. One is I have gotten training, and I can lead a workshop called Soul Shop. It's a workshop for faith communities on suicide. And so some of the stuff that we went through today, you will hear it again, but it's more, hopefully a little more hands-on to get you more comfortable. A lot of what we did here was talk to you, where this is a way to kind of get you to interact and hopefully get you more comfortable with asking those questions. Because one of the first activity they ask you to do in the group is turn to somebody in, 2 or 3 people together, 3 or 4, and say the word suicide in a sentence. We did that in our church in Redfield. There were people who could not even say the word suicide. And if we can't say the word suicide, it's going to be hard to talk to somebody about suicide. So it's just practical things like that. And the more you get used to practicing asking those questions, will give you ideas on how to ask the question. Because the main thing we want to do is to do things safely, directly and safely. So, because there are ways that can be harmful of doing it. And so a lot of us are afraid to do it because we don't want to say the wrong thing. And so this is a way to kind of make it more practical. They actually recommend that churches should do this every year, just because repetition makes it easier to do these things. So if you're interested, we could come and I could do this for you for Soul Shop. So
the other thing is, we talked about the fact that idea of asking about the loved one, asking for sharing of memories. For the person who's experiencing it, a death by suicide is still a death. So that idea that, we were really lucky because our congregation had known Ben since he was little. And so people brought food, people brought paper goods. People talked to us, people reached out to us. So it wasn't that nobody can do those things because nobody can talk about it. So treating it like any other death is important. And within school systems, there are policies sometimes that are well-meaning but misguided. So a student who died in a car accident, students were allowed to put decorations on a locker, to have T-shirts printed. Student who died by suicide, nothing.
Can't do it.
They couldn't, school told students they
Because
couldn't.
you might be encouraging
Yep.
other people,
Yes.
other kids, if they see it glorified.
And in the same way, it came time for graduation for these students, and they said, we'd like to put out the empty chairs to say we remember our classmate. And at first they were told, no, we're not going to allow you to put out anything, or you can put out one chair, but you can't put out two chairs. And it took the senior class advisor basically going into the superintendent and demanding that class be allowed to put out chairs for each person who died before they could get policy changed. So little things within your community even that you could do to support people in the situation are important. So while you might not be the individual who says to somebody, are you considering suicide? There are still some public things that you can do that support families and support people who are experiencing mental illness.
So on one of your flyers, you have Keith Kraft, author. I don't consider myself an author, but I did after Ben's death. So I spoke at Ben's funeral, and a lot of people were like, boy, that was really helpful. You need to let other people read it. And over the next 4 years, things would come up, and I would just write down things. It was my way of processing. Again, somebody told me I should put it in a book. So I have, this is self-printed, whatever. So I have put out a book that's just a series of those writings over 4 years that I did this. They're really short. They're really simple. The title is Pain Seeking Understanding in Search of Hope and Healing. I'll tell you right now, disclaimer, not disclaimer, but
Spoiler.
what?
The spoiler.
Yeah, spoiler alert, there's no understanding. When it comes to suicide, there's no understanding. But it was a way to work through it. So I do have books. If you want one, they're $10. It's just, I tell people it's an easy read because I am not really highly intellectually theological and all that. What you see is what you get. There are no $5 words. Well, inflation. There are no $20 words. They're mostly like 25-cent words. But anyway, if you want one, again, I put this out mainly to let people know that if you've lost someone by suicide, there's somebody else out there that gets it, that understands it. Nobody knows exactly what you're going through. Each death is unique. Each death, what you're going through is based on your relationship with that person who's died. So I've lost a child, I lost a son by suicide. Somebody else, another father loses a son by suicide. His experience might be totally different. His not totally different, but his emotions, how he takes it might be different. What I go through is different than what Deb goes through because she's a mother. I'm the father. So but there are people that go, okay, yeah, at least somebody else out there kind of understands.
So when we talk about resources, one of the things that Keith and I are in the process of trying to finalize, and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and through South Dakota has a program where you can ask to have someone who's experienced a loss from suicide visit Healing Conversations. So you can ask, if you have experienced that, you can ask to have a representative call you or contact you. So we have been through the interview, we've been through the recommendation, we have a set of training we have to take, but eventually we'll be to the point that the National Foundation for Suicide Prevention can say, yes, we have someone from South Dakota who has lost a child. They can either see you, they can contact you, they can Zoom, whatever, but we are more than willing to visit with families who have experienced suicide.
So we don't charge to come out, even if you want us to do Soul Shop. We won't charge to do that. If you do take a free will offering, if we take it, we give it to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. That's the one that we've set up for, and we give it in Ben's name. So that's where it goes. After our son's death, we got lots of memorials, and so we had this money that we needed to decide what to do with. And our middle child, Andrew, loves getting on the internet and deciding. So we gave him that task, and we chose the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. NAMI is the other one that's good. Both of them are pretty equal in the amount that actually goes to work rather than just administration. The one where we found with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention was a little bit better was in research. And I am a big believer in research because to me the mind is the last frontier. We just don't understand it. I think they are gaining. I think they're starting to gain on some things on Alzheimer's and some of that. So anyway.
But the big thing is if nothing else, please remember that 988 is there as a suicide helpline and for prevention and crisis. And 741-741 is the text number for a suicide hotline. So thank you.
Yep.
You know, it's always reassuring to us, and it's heartwarming to know there are people who care and people who show up, people who are concerned about individuals in their community and in their families.
It's not an easy topic. A lot of people shy away from it. So thank you for coming. We do appreciate it.
We do thank Keith and Deb for coming and sharing Ben's story, their story, and their work and research. And we also want to let all of you know that we are extending our time. We do have some coffee and some refreshments in our side room over here, just to continue our time together and share in conversation. Absolutely. Yep. So thanks again, and thank you so much for all of you for coming today and listening in and you know being compassionate and being present and being willing to listen and address these concerns. So thank you.